Hey, what's up everybody? Jake here and welcome to the hobby. I got a fun video for you guys today because we are talking about whether you should buy the cards or buy the label, and in almost all cases I would recommend you buy the cards and not the label. And you're thinking to yourself, well, I always buy the cards, I never buy the label. And so what's really happening here? So let me throw you guys some quick examples and you can probably see my point immediately. Let's talk about some pretty awesome cards. We got ourselves the Magikarp Illustration Rare. This card, ungraded, is currently going for right around $100. If you find PSA 10 copies of them, they regularly sell for $500 to $600. So that's a 500% markup for a PSA 10. What you're telling me is I can pick up 5 to 6 copies of the ungraded Illustration Rare Magikarp for the same price as a PSA 10. That's pretty unreasonable to me. For example, if I pick up 5 or 6 copies of them on the open market, I can promise you I can probably find 2 or 3 copies at least that are equivalent gem mint versions of them, just ungraded yet. So at a certain point, are you buying the grade, are you buying the label, or are you just buying the card? And in a lot of cases, if you're overspending money, you're just buying the grade. So that's a pretty egregious example, but it gets much deeper. So let's talk about another example. We got ourselves the Tyranitar Illustration Rare, another great looking card. This card in a PSA 10 is currently going for around $300 to $350, and ungraded copies are going for right around $30 to $35. So that's a 1000% markup on the PSA 10 copy, which means I can pick up 10 copies of the ungraded raw Tyranitar for the exact same price as the PSA 10. So at a certain point, are you buying the card or are you buying the grade? So that's what I want to come back to, is buy the cards and not the grade. And I promise you there is no world where a PSA 10 copy of the Tyranitar is going to be valued at the same level as 10 ungraded copies. If you find 10 ungraded copies, probably half of them will probably end up being PSA 10 anyway. So what is happening here? Why is there such a huge gap in some cards that are PSA 10s and ungraded copies? And you're probably thinking, well, if the market says people are buying it for $300, then the market is right. I can't argue with that. If they're selling for $300, that's the market price. And I absolutely agree with you. That's the market price. But the market price will change. The market price on these cards can change and will change. And what I'm trying to say is that graded Pokemon cards will always lag behind the rest of the market. These are brand new cards. The Magikarp and the Tyranitar have not been around for that long. They've been around for a year or two, but they haven't been around for that long. And usually what happens is the graded market lags. People have to find these cards inside of booster packs. They have to send them in for grading. They have to wait months for the cards to come back. They have to take the risk whether the card is a 9 or 10. And so it's going to take time for the market, the graded market, to catch up to the rest of the market. It's going to take time for those graded cards to make it onto the market. It's going to take a couple of years even, because the process is slow. It just takes time for individual people to submit cards. And during that time, the prices on these cards are gonna tighten. The prices between a PSA 10 copy and an ungraded copy should tighten to the point where it gets to a reasonable level. So what's a reasonable level? Well, let's look at a card that's a little bit older, and I think the PSA 10 copy makes complete sense. We got ourselves the Umbreon VMAX. Ungraded copies of the Umbreon VMAX currently go for right around $900. So it's a very expensive ungraded copy, but you don't see PSA 10 copies going for 1000% markup, 500% markup. What's the markup on a PSA 10? Well, PSA 10 version of the Umbreon VMAX currently goes for around $1,300. So that's about a 40% markup. Very reasonable, because if I want a PSA 10 copy, I'll just pick a PSA 10 copy off, because an ungraded copy, for me to pick one up for $900, to spend $100 on shipping and insurance, to send it into the grader, getting it back a couple of months later, and taking the risk of it not being a 10, it might not be worth it for me to do all that. So it's very reasonable for me to pick up a PSA 10 copy and just save myself all that hassle. It's not that expensive, right? But you're talking about a very small markup here, 40%. That's reasonable. Some modern cards, we're talking about 1,000% markup here. So let's talk about another example that I think is super egregious. We got ourselves the Charmander promo card from Obsidian Flames. This is an Elite Trainer Box promo card. There's a copy of this card inside of every single Obsidian Flame Elite Trainer box. And there are a ton of Obsidian Flames Elite Trainer boxes out there. How much is this card currently going for? It's going for right around $15, which is already pretty expensive for an Elite Trainer Box promos. Most Elite Trainer Box promos are only going for $1 or $2. They're usually not that expensive because Elite Trainer boxes tend to be readily available, and you can find Obsidian Flames Elite Trainer boxes in Walmart, Target, your local card shop. They're not that rare. It's still a very fresh set, and right now PSA 10 copies of this Charmander is currently going for right around $175. Like I said, ungraded copies are going for 15 bucks. Graded copies are going for $175. That's more than 1,000% markup on this card. I can pick up this card on the open market for $15 all day long. If I pick up 12 copies of this card, you bet I could probably find a couple that is probably PSA 10 worthy. Is it really worth it for me to spend $175 to buy a PSA 10 copy? At a certain point, you're just buying the label. And you're probably thinking, well, Jake, if the margin is so wide, why aren't there people grading these cards right now? There are absolutely people grading these cards by the bucket load. There are secondary resellers who are buying 100, 1,000 copies of these promos or unique cards that are incredibly cheap. They're buying 1,000 copies of them. They're reselling the ones that they don't think are PSA 10 worthies, and they're sending half of them to PSA or whoever else, and they're raking in that massive margin. And who are they making that money from? They're making it from other collectors. They're selling them to collectors like you and I at these ridiculous margins. And I'm sure there are collectors out there that are excited to have these PSA 10 copies of cards inside of their collection. You betcha. They look super cool. They're awesome looking promo cards. They want to make sure that they have the best copy available, which is going to be a Gem Mint copy. And they think it's going to be a wonderful investment long term. But these cards are so fresh. There's so few PSA 10 copies out there. Just take your time. At this point, I don't have a copy of the Charmander and a PSA 10 inside of my collection. I have multiple copies of this card ungraded inside of my binder and top loaded up. They look great on display. They look great inside of my binder. I don't feel the need to have this $15 card in a PSA 10. And if that label, if that PSA 10 label is truly worth $150 markup on a $15 card to you, then you bet. Pick it up because between you and I, you probably have more money to throw around. So if that's truly what you want, do it. But I'm gonna say for most people, the value is buying the card, because instead of buying a PSA 10 copy of this Charmander for $150 extra, I can pick up so many cool ungraded cards out there. And don't get me wrong, I love graded cards. I have plenty of graded cards inside of my collection. You guys see them in the background all the time. But there's a time and place for graded cards. And currently, it seems like everyone thinks every card needs to be graded. Every single card in a PSA 10 is going to be completely the best card in the world. And if it's a PSA 9, it's hot garbage. Get that out of here. Because how much is this Charmander in a PSA 9? This Charmander in a PSA 9 is probably 20 bucks. So PSA 10, $175. PSA 9, 20 bucks. There are cases where that PSA 9 copy may look even better or is in better condition than that PSA 10. So really, buy the card rather than buying the label. What are you buying at the end of the day? That's pretty much all I have to say. So thank you so much for watching. I hope this has been insightful. I think it's gonna rub some people the wrong way, because I know there are people out there that are excited to get these cards. But at the end of the day, I'd rather you guys buy the cards rather than buying the label. Thank you so much, and I'll see you guys next time.